What if the most powerful empire of China hid its greatest secrets not in tombs, but in rooms no one ever left? Behind crimson walls and under golden leaves, a labyrinth of 9,000 chambers held emperors, eunuchs, concubines, and spies. But this wasn't just a palace, it was a machine of ritual, silence, and control. At its heart, a single truth hidden in plain sight. Out of all those rooms, there was only one way out, one gate, one exit. Why? Tonight, we don't walk through just a palace. We walk through a maze of a controlled society behind magnificent palace walls. Welcome to various eras in time. Enjoy and embark on this mysterious journey. Prepare to question everything you thought you knew about the Forbidden City. Because in a palace so vast, it was a city within an entire city. Why design it with just one exit? Was it ceremonial, a defensive strategy, or something far more unsettling, a symbol of control? For centuries, whispers have trailed behind the vermilion gates of the Forbidden City. Rumors of disappearances, secret executions, and lives lived without ever seeing the world beyond its walls. Once you entered, you belonged to the emperor. Beijing, 1420. The Ming dynasty unveils its jewel of absolute power, a sprawling imperial complex that took over 1 million laborers and 14 years to build. Gold-tiled roofs shimmered under the northern sun, and red lacquered walls stretched farther than the eye could see. But the awe-inspiring exterior wasn't meant for the people. It was a performance of divinity, a message carved in stone and silence. The Son of Heaven lives here, and here alone. While the Forbidden City dazzled with wealth and perfection, it also isolated its inhabitants in ways the outside world could barely imagine. This wasn't just a palace, it was a perfectly engineered world of obedience. The emperor, surrounded by 9,000 rooms, could move unseen for weeks. Servants were forbidden to look at him. Concubines were guarded like state secrets. Even the sky was calculated. Colors, sounds, directions, all designed to reflect cosmic balance. But what happens when balance is enforced through fear? When a city is walled not to keep intruders out, but to keep its residents in? Step past the Meridian Gate, and suddenly the world begins to dissolve. You are no longer in Beijing. You are in another dimension of space and time, a place where distance is measured not in steps, but in silence. The layout of the Forbidden City was no accident. It was a calculated maze of power. Every corridor, courtyard, and chamber was designed to manipulate perception. Long, straight paths abruptly turn. Gates align with constellations. Distances are deceiving. Too grand to walk casually, too narrow to escape unseen. Foreign dignitaries described it as intoxicating, paralyzing, and disorienting. But to those who lived there, it was not awe. It was surveillance. This was not just architectural mastery. It was psychological warfare. The Forbidden City was designed to magnify the emperor and diminish everyone else. The sheer scale reminded visitors that the throne was unreachable. It was the state made manifest in stone and ceremony. Servants walked with heads bowed. Ministers navigated court rituals that could take years to master. A single mistake could mean exile or death. And somewhere deep in this architectural theater was a chilling truth. No matter how many rooms there was only one way out. The Forbidden City held more than emperors and officials. It held thousands of women, empresses, concubines, servants, all bound not by chains, but by duty, silence, and tradition. Once a woman entered these walls, her life changed forever. For many, it ended here. The Emperor's harem was not simply a romanticized palace of silk and song. It was a rigid, hierarchical prison. Some concubines were selected as young as 12, torn from their families and brought to the inner court. Once inside, they were renamed, re-ranked, and remade into silent symbols of imperial grace. Most would never see their homes again. Marriage was forbidden. Leaving was unthinkable. Behind those gold-lacquered screens, jealousy brewed like poison. Promotions were determined not by merit or service, but by whether a concubine caught the emperor's eye. Intrigue, betrayal, and whisper campaigns were not the exception. They were survival. And should a woman fall from favor, she would disappear quietly, her name struck from records, her chamber reassigned. What history rarely speaks of is how many of these women died without ceremony, buried not in honor but in obscurity, and how many more simply faded. Because in the Forbidden City, a woman could bear the emperor's child and still never be allowed to pass through the gate of divine might. There were 9,000 rooms, and nowhere to go. They were supposed to serve the emperor. But over time, they became something far more powerful and far more feared. The eunuchs of the Forbidden City were not simply servants. They were watchers, whisperers, archivists, spies. Castrated as boys, often in poverty, sometimes by force, they entered the palace stripped of lineage, identity, and future. Yet many would rise to become the most influential men behind the dragon throne. At their peak, over 70,000 eunuchs moved like shadows through the halls, holding the keys to secrets emperors didn't even know existed. Why eunuchs? The logic was political and patriarchal. Men without families were thought to have no ambition, no bloodline to protect, no children to scheme for. But the irony. These men, denied legacy, became the gatekeepers of legacy itself. Some ran the imperial treasury, others controlled communications between the emperor and his ministers. A rare few became confidants of the throne, dictating policy, choosing successors, even forging edicts in the emperor's name. They created their own courts, their own hierarchies, all inside the very heart of the palace. And yet, for all their influence, their fate was precarious. A eunuch could rise to untouchable power one day and be executed the next, dismembered, erased from history like a name scratched from silk. Some were buried with honor, most with none. They served in silence, but their silence shaped empires, because inside the Forbidden City, not all rulers wore crowns. From the outside, the emperor was the son of heaven, divine, untouchable, the living bridge between earth and the cosmos. But inside the Forbidden City, his life was anything but free. Every hour of his day was scripted, choreographed like a performance for unseen gods. From the moment he awoke, greeted not by sunlight, but by rows of kneeling attendants, his breath belonged to ritual, his voice to protocol, his movement to the ticking gears of court life. At dawn, he was dressed not by choice, but by code. The color of his robes, the number of dragons embroidered into silk, even the exact length of his sleeves, each carried symbolic weight. Breakfast was served with formality, observed by silent eunuchs, who recorded his appetite. Every meeting, from grand council sessions to private petitions, was scheduled to the minute. Even his leisure, calligraphy, music, or tending the imperial garden was overseen by officials whose sole task was to ensure divine dignity remained intact. The irony: the most powerful man in China was imprisoned by his own image. The Forbidden City wasn't just a palace, it was a stage, and the emperor, its lead actor, couldn't stray from the script without risking cosmic disorder or rebellion. He could command armies, but not decide when to sleep. He could name successors, but not choose what to eat. He ruled the Middle Kingdom, yet often never left its walls. The Forbidden City gave him the illusion of total control, while quietly tightening the cage around him. Step inside the Forbidden City, and it feels less like a palace and more like a maze designed to confuse even time itself. Over 980 surviving buildings, laid out across 180 acres, the city's architecture was more than just grand. It was coded, layered with symbolism, control, and surveillance. Every corridor, every courtyard, every archway whispered the same message. You do not belong here unless you were born to rule, or to serve it. The layout followed strict Confucian principles, order, hierarchy, and cosmic harmony. But behind that order, secrecy. The city's walls weren't just meant to keep intruders out, they were designed to fragment movement, sight, and sound. A visitor might be allowed into the outer court, but they would never glimpse the inner chambers. An official might walk the same path daily and never know what happened just a few steps beyond a sealed door. Even the tiles spoke in code. Yellow glazed roofs for the emperor, green for scholars, blue for the sky. Servants used hidden side paths, narrow stone alleys carved into the walls, unseen by guests or outsiders. And guards, always stationed just far enough apart that no one saw the whole picture. Even they were kept in the dark. This was a place where whispers traveled faster than footsteps, and where rumors, not revolts, often proved deadliest. It wasn't built for comfort. It wasn't built for openness. It was built to protect power, and to bury the price of it in silence. They were the invisible architects of imperial survival, or downfall. In the vast machine of the Forbidden City, no group wielded silent power more effectively than the eunuchs. Castrated at a young age, sometimes by force, sometimes by desperate choice, they entered the palace not as men, but as instruments of the emperor's will. Or so it seemed. What began as a means to ensure loyalty, men without heirs had no dynasties to pursue, evolved into something far more complex and dangerous. Eunuchs became scribes, advisors, spies, and, in time, kingmakers. They were everywhere and nowhere. They served tea, carried messages, oversaw punishments, and sometimes whispered into the emperor's ear with more influence than ministers could ever dream of. During the Ming dynasty, some eunuchs held more power than the emperor's own blood relatives. One, Wei Zhongxian, is said to have ruled from the shadows so completely that officials had to bow to his portrait in public offices. Those who defied him vanished. But their loyalty came with a cost. Mistrust. Emperors feared them, empresses loathed them. And the public, if they knew anything at all, believed the eunuchs to be manipulative, corrupt, and cruel. Were they villains or survivors of a cruel system playing the only hand they were given? Inside the Forbidden City, the eunuchs didn't just walk halls, they haunted them. Keepers of secrets too sensitive for scrolls, too dangerous for history books. From the outside, he seemed like a god on earth, ruler of millions, seated on a golden throne beneath a dragon-emblazoned ceiling. But within the Forbidden City, the emperor was often the loneliest man alive, surrounded by ceremony, cloaked in tradition, and suffocated by protocol. His every move was controlled, his words scripted, his choices filtered. He was worshipped, yes. The Son of Heaven could not speak freely, laugh loudly, or even eat a peach without someone recording it. Behind every silk curtain stood a eunuch. Beyond every carved screen waited a courtier with ears attuned to imperial moods. And above all, the emperor was trapped by expectations, by duty, and by a sprawling city that was his palace and his prison. Many emperors never left the Forbidden City in their lifetime. Some never even saw their own people. They governed from behind lacquered doors, isolated by layers of etiquette, paranoia, and the ever-present fear of betrayal. Some descended into madness, others into silence. Emperor Yongzheng, for example, famously ruled with ruthless precision, yet in private, he kept a room filled with clocks, watching time slip through his fingers as if it were the only truth he could trust. The irony was cruel. In a palace of 9,000 rooms, filled with concubines, scholars, and servants, the emperor had no equals, only shadows for company. He was the embodiment of divine rule, yet forbidden from living like a man. There is a pavilion near the rear gardens of the Forbidden City, paint faded, tiles slick with moss, and windows sealed tight even in the height of summer. Palace records refer to it simply as a resting hall, but the eunuchs who lived through dynasties called it something else. The Ghost Pavilion. They said the wind here whispered names, no one spoke aloud. The lanterns flickered without flame. Those shadows moved across the paper walls with no footsteps to match. And always, the scent of incense, sweet and smoky, lingered long after ceremonies had ended. It was in this pavilion, some claim, where deposed concubines were quietly hidden away, not imprisoned in cells, but in silence. These were women who had once graced the emperor's gaze, but were now seen as political liabilities. Some had brothers who offended the court, others had no sons to bear for entitlement or glory. In the palace, irrelevance was a sentence. They were left here to fade. What makes this tale even more chilling is that no official imperial record confirms the Ghost Pavilion's purpose. Yet it appears again and again in personal letters, in court gossip, and even in late Qing memoirs, always described in hushed tones. A place of forgotten women, invisible grief, and voices that returned only at midnight. Even in a city obsessed with control, there were things no decree could silence. And while the Forbidden City's stone dragons roared in the daylight, it was in the Ghost Pavilion that the Empire's guilt whispered back. One eunuch, Wei Zhongxian, rose so far in power during the late Ming era that he practically ruled the empire from the shadows. His enemies vanished, his allies grew rich. His control extended from the imperial treasury to the Empress's chambers. And when he finally fell from favor, his name was stricken from all records. Proof that even ghosts in silk could terrify emperors. The Labyrinth, they say, still exists, sealed behind walls no longer walked, its entrances disguised behind storage closets and forgotten gardens. But the stories, they remain. Because in the Forbidden City, silence was never empty. It echoed within the walls of those who ruled without thrones. From the outside, the Forbidden City shimmered like a divine jewel, golden roofs catching the sun, vermilion gates rising like mountains of power. But from within, for those who lived behind its walls, it became something far more suffocating. A prison lined with silk and silence. Especially for the women of the court, empresses, concubines, princesses who entered in youth and for many never saw the outside world again. They were cloaked in brocade and powdered in porcelain, but their lives were measured in hierarchy, jealousy, and fear. Every smile at a banquet could hide betrayal. Every favor from the emperor could inspire lethal envy. These women were educated, poised, and caged, locked behind stone walls that promised privilege, but delivered solitude. There were over 70 palaces inside the Forbidden City, yet only a single gate to the outside world. Why? Because control was more than physical, it was psychological. And the less you saw of the world, the less you believed you had one. Forbidden to leave unless summoned, many concubines grew old within the same palace courtyard, their names forgotten, their stories buried under layers of lacquered history. Some went mad, Others wrote secret poems on fans and silk, which were later found sewn into pillows or hidden beneath floorboards. Their cries were not loud, but lingering, echoes of lives gilded in gold, but lived in shadow. And for the emperor himself? Even his majesty came with a paradox. He ruled the world outside, but he too was bound by the rhythms of ritual and expectation within. He could not walk freely. He could not speak without being heard. He, too, was a prisoner. Just one with a throne. At the southern end of the Forbidden City stood the Meridian Gate, its towering presence more than an architectural wonder. It was the only way in, and the only way out. But why would a palace of over 9,000 rooms, home to emperors, officials, concubines, and servants, have just a single, official exit? The answer, like the palace itself, lies in layers of symbolism, strategy, and suspicion. The Forbidden City wasn't built merely as a home. It was a theater of control. The singular gate was not a flaw. It was a message. Power is centralized. Access is earned. Escape is impossible. Every individual who passed through that gate was tracked, recorded, and judged. It ensured that no one entered who wasn't permitted, and no one left without notice. The Meridian Gate wasn't just a checkpoint, it was a stage. Emperors addressed their subjects from its towers. Triumphs were announced. Punishments were declared. Beneath it, high officials were sometimes flogged, their cries echoing into the vast air like confessions whispered to ghosts. The gate was the mouth of the palace, a place that could offer reward or ruin. And then there's this. While technically other side gates existed, they were heavily guarded and rarely used. To the people inside, those gates may as well have not existed. The Meridian Gate became both a beginning and an end, an illusion of openness in a world designed to close in on itself. Even in death, the gate stood final. Imperial concubines who fell out of favor were not allowed grand exits. Some were quietly removed through side passages in the dark of night, their names struck from court records. Others never left at all. For the emperor's funeral, his coffin exited through the Meridian Gate. One gate, one path, one fate. It is here, at this convergence of glory and isolation, that the Forbidden City's most haunting symbolism crystallizes, not in how people entered, but in how few ever left. To rule an empire of millions, one must control the palace first. And within the Forbidden City, power wasn't just enforced with armies and decrees, it was whispered, watched, and recorded by a chilling presence, the secret police, known as the Eastern Depot during the Ming Dynasty, and later as the Grand Secretariat's embroidered uniform guard, also known as the Brocade Guard. These weren't mere guards. They were spies, interrogators, executioners, and illusionists of fear. Dressed in elegant robes, embroidered with dragons or peonies, they looked like officials. But their silence struck harder than swords. They blended in with eunuchs, scribes, and footmen, stationed behind carved screens and shadowed pillars. Every word spoken near the emperor, every glance exchanged by officials, every sigh from a concubine could become a report. And if suspicion arose, it didn't take a courtroom to decide your fate, just a scroll sealed in red and a midnight knock on your door. Some of these agents were eunuchs themselves, men without heirs, sworn wholly to the emperor. Others were recruited from the outer provinces, trained in deception, surveillance, and interrogation. They operated dungeons beneath the city, hidden chambers where confessions were squeezed from silence. What made this surveillance so effective was that no one knew exactly who belonged to the network. Ministers spied on each other. Concubines reported on rivals. Even palace cooks were known to slip notes into rice bowls. Trust was a luxury few could afford. This was not just a court, it was a stage where every actor feared the audience might be armed. And this constant paranoia was intentional. The Forbidden City thrived not on peace, but on pressure. The secret police didn't just eliminate threats. They created an atmosphere so tightly wound that fear itself became the Emperor's strongest ally. So when people say the Forbidden City was silent at night, they're only half right. It wasn't silent. It listened. In the Forbidden City, power wore many masks, but none more deceptive than the eunuchs. Stripped of their manhood but not of ambition, these palace men rose from servants to puppet masters. They were everywhere, managing the emperor's seal, guarding the gates, attending the concubines, even writing imperial edicts. And for centuries they wielded more power than the ministers who bowed in the daylight. Originally intended to be harmless, unable to father children or build dynasties, eunuchs were considered safe administrators for the emperor's inner sanctum. But this logic overlooked a vital truth. Power denied often transforms into power pursued, and inside the Forbidden City, they built their own empire. Some eunuchs, like Wei Zhongxian of the Ming dynasty, controlled armies, dictated laws, and had officials tortured or executed with a whisper. His name alone was enough to paralyze entire ministries. Others enriched themselves through corruption, controlling trade, taxes, and access to the emperor. It was said that a single word from a favored eunuch could make or unmake a man overnight. Yet their rise wasn't always villainous. Some served loyally and protected emperors from internal chaos. In a palace where betrayal bloomed like spring jasmine, eunuchs often became the emperor's only confidant. They raised him, clothed him, soothed his fevers, and buried his enemies. In many ways, they became his shadow fathers. But this closeness came at a cost. Eunuchs were despised by the literati and the Confucian elite. They were accused of plotting coups, manipulating succession, and even seducing palace women. An ironic accusation given their physical condition. The tension between eunuchs and scholars became one of the most dangerous undercurrents in Forbidden City politics. Their quarters, separate, modest, and heavily surveilled, hid vast wealth and whispered power plays. Some had libraries of secret documents. Others practiced occult rituals for favor and fortune. One corridor near the Hall of Mental Cultivation was known not for its architecture, but because no official entered it without a bribe. The eunuch empire never sat on the throne, but often they whispered into the ears of those who did. From the outside, the emperor appeared to be the most powerful man in the world, cloaked in silk, seated on a dragon throne, worshipped as the Son of Heaven. But within the walls of the Forbidden City, power often came with isolation so deep it blurred the line between divinity and imprisonment. The emperor's every moment was dictated. He awoke at dawn to the sound of ceremonial gongs. His meals were pre-tasted, his schedule written by ministers, and his movements shadowed by dozens of attendants. He could not freely walk through his own palace without being followed or observed. Behind the magnificence of golden roofs and crimson corridors was a truth few dared whisper. The emperor was a prisoner of protocol. He lived within a world designed to insulate him from chaos, but also from truth. Most emperors never stepped foot outside the Forbidden City. They did not see their people, nor the suffering that brewed beyond their vermilion gates. Instead, they ruled through scrolls and servants, relying on what others chose to show them. Ministers manipulated reports, eunuchs filtered news. Even the weather was at times falsified in official records to flatter imperial image. This cloistered existence shaped emperors in haunting ways. Some grew paranoid, fearing assassins in the shadows of their own bedchambers. Others sank into indulgence or mysticism, trying to fill the void with alchemy, concubines, or ancient texts promising immortality. A few, like the Wanli Emperor, famously stopped attending court altogether, ruling from behind closed doors, refusing to speak to his ministers for years. And then there were the child emperors, mere boys handed the weight of an empire. They sat on the dragon throne with feet barely touching the floor, forced to nod at decisions they could not understand. Puppets in embroidered robes. Symbols, not sovereigns. The Forbidden City gave emperors the illusion of omnipotence, while quietly wrapping them in silken chains. It was a paradise so controlled that even the ruler of all under heaven became a shadow of himself, trapped in golden silence. The Forbidden City was built by men, ruled by men, and guarded by men, or so the records claim. But if you peel back the silk screens and listen past the official edicts, another story emerges, a story of whispers, veils, and power wielded from behind embroidered curtains. For while emperors sat on thrones, it was often the women, especially the Empress Dowagers, who truly pulled the strings. One name rises above them all: Empress Dowager Cixi. In the late 19th century, she entered the Forbidden City as a concubine, an imperial consort of the Xianfeng Emperor. She had no noble title, no political backing, and no reason to believe she would shape the destiny of China. But then she gave birth to a son. That single act changed everything. When the emperor died young and her son became the child emperor, Cixi stepped into the void of power as regent. But her regency was not ceremonial. She orchestrated palace coups, silenced rival factions, and installed a second child emperor when her own son died under suspicious circumstances. Officially, she ruled from behind a silk curtain, never to be seen addressing the court. But make no mistake, her word was law. Cixi mastered the architecture of the Forbidden City. She understood its politics, its rituals, and most importantly, its optics. She used the shadows to her advantage, shaping policies from the inner court while letting others carry the blame in public. Ministers feared her, eunuchs served her loyally, and foreign envoys learned never to underestimate her velvet grip. But Cixi was not the first. Long before her, there were Empress Dowagers, who acted as de facto rulers. They commissioned palaces, overrode military campaigns, and arranged imperial marriages that altered the course of dynasties. They used motherhood as a political weapon and silence as a strategic language. In a world where women could not wear the crown, they wore the veil and ruled just as ruthlessly. Their names were often erased or softened in history books, but their influence was carved into the walls of the Forbidden City. Behind every emperor, especially the weak, the young, and the distracted, stood a woman whose power did not need to be declared. It was understood. And as we move deeper into the Forbidden City's secrets, remember this: some of the most enduring legacies were written not by the hand of the emperor, but by the women who taught him how to hold the brush. For a city built to symbolize absolute control, the Forbidden City hid many things, not just treasures and concubines, but secrets carved into stone and buried beneath lacquered floors. Among the most whispered about mysteries were its hidden passageways, narrow, torchlit corridors that coiled behind walls, underneath courtyards, and even beneath the feet of those who never suspected they were walking above escape routes. Why would the Son of Heaven, divine ruler of all under heaven, need secret exits? Because even behind 26-foot walls, power was never guaranteed. The Forbidden City may have projected invincibility from the outside, but within its heart, the emperor lived in a constant state of fear. Assassinations were not just the stuff of palace gossip, they were real, documented threats. Rebellious eunuchs, poisoned scrolls, and rival family factions meant that every hallway could be a trap, every servant a spy. To guard against this, Generations of emperors commissioned labyrinthine designs, stone tunnels connecting the inner court to fortified towers, concealed doors hidden behind silk tapestries, and chambers with rotating screens meant to confuse intruders or offer the emperor a few precious seconds to flee. Some tunnels were said to lead all the way beneath the city walls, through cryptic sandstone chambers to hidden exits in the imperial gardens. Others connected the Hall of Mental Cultivation to the Hall of Supreme Harmony, bypassing public scrutiny entirely. Only a handful of trusted guards, often eunuchs or bodyguards raised from childhood, knew the full map of these hidden areas. And yet, not all of these routes were for escape. Some were for surveillance. Emperors would dispatch spies through these corridors to eavesdrop on court officials or monitor concubines suspected of betrayal. Others used them to visit favored consorts under the cover of night, bypassing prying eyes and court protocol. These silent pathways were never officially documented, and many were sealed off during the Republican era, their entrances lost to dust and time. But fragments remain: uneven floor tiles in forgotten wings, warped baseboards, concealing false panels, and whispers from workers who claim to have discovered entire sealed rooms during renovations. Even today, parts of the Forbidden City are closed to the public, not because they're unsafe, but because what lies within them is unknown. And so, as we walk the grand gilded halls open to tourists, centuries of dark secrets embedded between the walls of the Forbidden City may have been forgotten. We can just use our imagination to take us back in time into the dark past, where no one had the possibility of leaving this ancient city. So, after all the myths, the monarchs, the whispers, and the soundless footsteps of centuries past, what is the Forbidden City, really? It is not just a palace, not just 9,000 rooms. It is a maze of secrets of silence, polished into a charade of survival. A chessboard, where emperors made their final moves behind lacquer doors. A theater built on controlled fear. And that gate? That one gate, the Meridian Gate, the only road in or out. It was a statement, a warning, that once you entered the heart of power, there was no exit unless it allowed you to leave. It kept the world out, and it kept its rulers in. Even today, the Forbidden City does not reveal everything. There are rooms untouched by sunlight for hundreds of years. Documents sealed, chambers unopened. A world that once believed the Son of Heaven ruled all beneath the sky. Thank you again for exploring with us. If you found this journey educating, enlightening, or unforgettable, please consider subscribing to Various Eras in time for more lost legacies, forbidden truths, and historical stories lost in time. Leave a comment below. What secrets do you think still awaits behind the walls of the Forbidden City?